The Merrie Show. Yay! And oh, howdy doody!
Go ahead, sing it here.
What's that?
Go ahead and sing it.
I don't remember howdy doody. I don't know if we'll have anybody zooming in, but we'll do this so that we can record it. Both Mike, who would normally be here, and Whit, who would normally be here, are doing other things this morning. They already told me that. So I would say you can start anytime you want.
Oh, okay. Well, so just to review. The youngest son of Jesse, David, is anointed king by Samuel, and then he slays Goliath, gaining the attention of King Saul. This is just quick. By the way, the one thing we never tell children is that he did chop the head off.
Yeah.
So if somebody's watching, oh dear. Or, and this is just another story that's woven into Samuel, and you have both of them. David is already in the army of Saul and gains his attention. I didn't do that. Let's see. No problem. Gains his attention. Well, let's see. Which direction shall I go? There we go. All right. Anyway, yeah, David is already in the army of Saul and gains his attention by playing the harp for Saul when Saul is on the verge of his periodic breaks with sanity. Well, I bet I got it all together in one sentence. Saul hates David for being more popular with the kingdom's people and with his own son Jonathan than Saul is. He perceives David as a potential usurper. Even though David is married to Saul's daughter, Saul proclaims David an outlaw. David spends several years hiding from Saul and working for the enemy Philistines. Twice David could have killed Saul in those years, but he does not. David never fights with the Philistines against Saul. In this picture, at the end of his time, he was living in a Ziklag, which was a town that belonged to the Philistines and along the border of Judah. And he had gone to fight the Amalekites and some others, but came home with loot that clearly belonged to another town. He took it back to that town where it belonged and gave it back. He had, was doing things a little differently. One Amalekite runner brings Saul's crown to David, telling him that Saul and Jonathan died on the heights of Mount Gilboa, fighting the Philistines. And that's pretty much where we ended last time. And when David is convinced of the news that Saul and Jonathan have died, David tore his clothes. There's going to be a lot of tearing of clothes. Kind of a waste. That was it. That was it. He was just bursting out of them. And he wept and fasted until evening, mourning for Saul and for Jonathan, for Israel and for the army of Israel. And then he composed this song. At the evening, David sung a song of lamentation, which he had composed, and here is that song. And I find it fascinating, frankly. So you're going to have to suffer through it. And I guess you can't see that. Anyway, your glory, O Israel, lies slain upon the high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ascalon, or The daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. And so, how would you paraphrase that?
Keep this quiet. We don't want them to gloat.
Yeah, it's very painful to know that someone's very happy over the very thing that you're crushed about. And Gath and Ascalon are major towns in the Philistine territory. You have a weekly report available. The mountain, you mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor bounteous fields, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul anointed with oil no more. And it's almost as, I don't know whether the shield was anointed with oil or not. Maybe it was, but the shield could in fact be Saul who was anointed. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, nor the sword of Saul return empty. There's this thing about swords devouring life that come, it'll show up several times, but, and this is one of them. It's as though the sword didn't have to have a hand. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, and they were stronger than lions. And of course, they were neither of those things, but but eagles and lions are associated with royalty, and the fact it was a miracle, in fact, that Jonathan died with his father, given his feelings toward David. Not a miracle, but a very wonderful statement of loyalty. So, O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in crimson, in luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. In other words, the kingdom prospered under him, I guess, and made this possible. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. And then his lament for Jonathan. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I'm distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. And again, we wonder, just wonder. But in that time, especially among the Greeks, women had no value, almost no value at all. And it sounds sort of like that. It was always better to love your brother than to love a woman. So, go ahead.
Picking up on what you were just saying is that, kings and royalty, you just given all these women,
Yeah,
who may not have loved you at all, but with Jonathan and or any other sort of friendship that was based not on political alliance or something like that, that could have.
and a rare gift for a
Yeah,
king,
yeah.
a very rare gift. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perish. And again, the weapons could be people. There's a blend here. So what do you think of the eulogy? And what, if anything, would you be likely to remember about it?
He certainly seemed to forget all the hard feelings, between him and Saul.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there was a lot of reason for him to write something totally different.
That's good, that's what it feels to me.
What did you say?
Sort of tends, I think, to, once people pass, see them in a slightly different light, you know, all the negative things or most of it washes away. Focus on positive things.
I wonder, the scholarly wonders. You know, if David, let's just say David didn't write it, but it was written by the historians,
Mhm.
just sort of emphasize David's loyalty to the house. And regardless of everything else that went on. Or it could have been, you know, David saying, I was always loyal.
Mhm.
You know, it works either way, to show that loyalty despite all the whatever.
There was an indication that this comes from a book called Jasper or Jashar or something. And there's another reference to it in Chronicles, that same book, which apparently was a book that stored these kinds of statements that were made on occasions. And of course, it's mentioned, but no one's ever found it. So if he did write it, I think what I found amazing about it was how genuine the grief seems to be. And even for Saul. Now, he could easily have seen Saul as, you know, the person God meant him to be and ignored all the things that Saul did to sully that. But the other thing is, if you're going to be king, you don't want to say that it's okay to kill kings. I always thought there was a little self-interest in his protection of Saul. Okay, so David's anointed in Judah, but not in Israel. So after mourning Saul and Jonathan, David asked the Lord, shall I return to Israel and Judah? And God said, yes. That's those two stones in the ephod, probably, the yes, no. And to which city should I go? Hebron was the answer. So that's the capital, if there is a capital, of Judah. And Israel would be everything up above Jericho. And at this point, Judah, which is Judea here because this is the wrong map, but Hebron is, you can tell where it is. So David with his two wives, only two at this point, not counting Michal, and his men and their families moved to the towns around Hebron. Now he has a whole troop. I mean, anywhere from 200 to 400 households. I mean, he's got an army. Since Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle against the Philistines, the elders of Judah invite David to be their king. And they do that as a tribe, which is the largest tribe of, they're an entity unto themselves, and that's what they're acting on, not all the other tribes. Now, why do you think they did that? Say?
Because they saw him as being strong.
I think so, definitely. And that's helpful. Very helpful in a time when you're likely to be overrun, just as Saul and Jonathan had been. Here's my guess. David had been protecting their border during the whole stay at Ziklag, and he was clearly capable of fighting off the Philistines with them. And he was their only choice. They didn't have anybody else. No one else could do a better in being the warrior king for them. But here's what a scholar said. He was trying to defend him, I think. David has demonstrated a different leadership style than Saul's. David is cared for his men, being sure that an even distribution of spoils of war went not only to the soldiers who fought, but also those who guarded the supply train. He has returned property recovered in raids to those from whom it was taken. He has given property to those in the territory surrounding Ziklag encampment in their time of need. Where Saul used the power of the throne primarily to maintain his image, David seems to be capable of using his power for the common good. Therefore, the people have begun to trust him to work not for himself, but for the good of all of Judah. I'm not sure I believe that. But there is indication that he's a better man than Saul. When the Philistines came upon Saul's body, they had stripped the armor and gave it as an offering to the goddess Astarte. And then the Philistines took Saul's body and the body of Jonathan and his other sons and hung them on the wall outside the walls of the city of Bethshan. So to totally disrespect them. And when the people of Jabesh Gilead, and you may not remember, but this was the very first problem that Saul had as a king, that a town was being overrun and threatened. And he marched, soon after his anointing, marched up there with his men and saved that town. So they are grateful to him. Heard this, some of their valiant men traveled through the night, recovered the bodies. And this was their way of paying Saul back for saving their city when he was first king. And these men washed and wrapped the bodies, prayed over them and fasted, and they buried them under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh and mourned officially for 7 days. When Paul heard what the valiant men of Jabesh Gilead had done for Saul and Jonathan, he sent them a message of thanks. It said, "Because you buried Saul and Jonathan, may the Lord bless you. I too will reward you in time. For now know that the people of Judah have made me their king." Now, while we know his gratitude was heartfelt, this is also very good politics. If you lived in Jabesh Gilead, which is on the far side, probably one of the farthest northern towns in Israel, so there'd be a great expanse of land between that. And you received this letter, wouldn't you want David eventually to become your king too? There's no denying that David is opportunistic. However, this trait is tempered with loyalties. He is loyal to Israel and is genuinely grieved at their loss to the Philistines. He's loyal to his commitments. For instance, he made a promise to Jonathan that he would protect Jonathan's family should Saul and Jonathan die in battle and David become king. And that's an unusual promise because the general rule was you tried to kill everybody related to a former king if you were starting a new house, so that they wouldn't challenge your throne. He has been loyal to Saul as God's anointed on one or two occasions by letting Saul live. He is loyal to God, demonstrated by the way he asks God before making his decisions, and he generally does what he perceives God recommends. So that's, well, and then sometimes he goes completely off rail, which will be next time.
But also what I can imagine is, God, what should I do here? What's that, God? Oh, okay. So he gets to do what he wants, but
I actually think he has enough faith to perceive a difference, but which would make him a very unique king. But there are times when he knows what God wants and doesn't do it. And that's coming, but not today. Okay, in Israel now, the kingdom to the north, Ishbaal or Ishbosheth is anointed king of Israel. Now, you may recognize the name Baal in there, and that could be man of Baal. Ish could be man. But one scholar said, yeah, but Baal wasn't a big issue yet. And the word Baal meant Lord. So this may not be as bad as it sounds.
Funny, all means Lord, those Adonai, and how, how that is translated into English Bibles is really fascinating. Why we translate one thing as Baal, which has that set of connotations, but we also translate Lord in another way that has a different set of connotations, and how that ends up sitting in us.
And I think we do the same thing with Allah. We don't recognize that that's just a legitimate name for God, not something to get all concerned about.
Right.
I teach a lot of Muslim kids, and we have that conversation all the time. He said, and they figure that the Jewish people stole their religion and then we stole the Christian, it's like, yeah, it's the other way around, kind of. But I said, all three religions believe there's one God.
Yeah.
So if we're all right, there's only one God. We just have different needs and different understandings. Oh, they say.
So Abner, general for Saul's army, had gone to Saul's remaining son, Ishbaal, aka Ishbosheth, and protected him from the Philistines by taking him to Menahem deep enough into Israel to place him out of reach of the Philistines. So you can see where Menahem is. It's the red one. But Judah is down below on this map. There's a Jerusalem. It wouldn't have been there yet, but down below near the Dead Sea. So it's pretty deep. Abner made him king over Gilead, Asher, Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and Israel. Ishbaal is said to have been 40, but I believe other scholars, I don't believe he was 40, who say that he must have been young enough not to have fought at Saul's side on Mount Gilboa. And this idea makes Abner more of a regent than a king. So we now have characters, Joab, Ashel, and Abishai coming up. They're all brothers, and according to Chronicles, nephews of David through David's sister, Zeruiah. Abishai was David's companion when the pair tiptoed into Saul's camp and found Saul sleeping. Abishai wanted to kill Saul then, and David prevented that. Joab later becomes David's general, but he's not fully a general yet. More of a commander among commanders. Abner, now Ishmael's general, wants to be sure that Judah is included in this one nation. And so just having a king in Judah is a cause for civil war. So Abner, now Ishbaal's general, took his men in Ishbaal's name to challenge David's rule in Judah. And Joab met Abner at the pool of Gibeon. These men up to now have been friends and have fought side by side. They know one another's families. The war between them is going to be painful. Abner suggests that 12 men from the army and 12 from Joab's army come forth and fight one another, and the winners of this contest could then also be winners of the battle, and everyone could go home. Sounded like a great idea, but when they clashed, they were so vicious that all 24 died. Unfortunately for the soldiers, all 12 immediately killed one another, so there was no clear winner, and a huge battle erupted. And Abner's soldiers eventually retreated. Joab's men followed them at a run. Now, Joab's brother Asahel was swift on his feet, and he pursued the retreating Abner well ahead of the others. And when Abner looked back, Ashel was close enough to pose a threat. Abner shouted, "Ashel, take a man to your left or to your right, kill him and take his valuables and armor for yourself and be done with this chase." I mean, if you were the man to the left or the right, just how happy would you be with your general? And why would any general say that? And which American generals that you know of might have said something similar? The one that comes most to my mind is Patton. Patton just used people to get the job done. But it's fun when you teach this to kids because they go, "What?" And we sit here and go, "It doesn't sound good." Okay, Ashel continued toward Abner, and Abner said, "Someday there will be peace between us. How could I ever face your brother Joab if I kill you?" And the slide says, "Turn aside. Why make a strike? Why make me strike you down? How could I face your brother Joab?" So you can see that there's a problem. Ashahel would not slow down, so Abner sighed, planted his feet, and used his spear. The translation is that he used the butt of the spear and it pierced right through him, and I can't figure that out for the life of me. Yeah, but that it went right through to his backbone, so must have done it hard. Ashel fell and died. Now Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Abner and came upon Ashel's body, and they paused in their pursuit to remove the body to a safe place. And that gave Abner time to group his Benjamite men, his personal guard, on the top of a hill called Amnah. Abner called down to Joab asking, "Will your sword keep devouring life?" And there's this idea that the sword's kind of independent of the person holding it. "These men with me are kinsmen to your soldiers. It's time to stop." Joab shouted back, "We would have continued till morning, but you reminded us who we are killing." 2 R's. And then Joab blew his trumpet. His men stopped fighting and grouped around Joab for their orders, and Joab ordered a retreat. Abner traveled through the night until he reached the walled city of Mahanaim, where he was safe, and Abner had lost 360 men. And Joab gathered his men and discovered that he had lost 19, 20 counting Ashel. 12 of those had died in that opening battle, that useless context. So you can see Abner's got a problem. It's kind of like it's like CU losing the game badly. Ashel was buried in the family tomb at Bethlehem, which may be in Israel territory at this point, not in Judah. I'm not sure. And Joab marched all day and all night until he came to Hebron. Every time after that battle that the Israel army clashed with Judah's, probably mostly border skirmishes, Israel's army grew weaker and Judah's grew stronger. Meanwhile, David's living like a king in that he is making treaties with other nations and powerful households, treaties that were often sealed with a marriage. And you're right, and throwing women at him. While living in Hebron, David acquired 4 more wives, making a total of 6, not counting Michal. Remember her, Saul's daughter? She saved David's life by lowering out a window when Saul first attempted to arrest David. Each of his wives have given birth to a son, and that made a peaceful transition to the next ruler more likely. This might prevent a civil war like they were fighting now, because one of David's sons should be named the next king before David died. And these sons made his people more secure and happy. Here are the names of the sons, and the ones in bold type in this list all made bids for the throne. The oldest one, oh, the bold type didn't come through. So Amnon is one of them, Absalom is one of them, and Adonijah is another. So that's good enough. You don't need to know them all. Purpose of this story is to convince the readers that David had nothing to do with Abner's death. And I don't know how long I'm supposed to go, till 10? Or 10, are we?
You got time. So.
Okay, I just don't know what the. Okay, Ishbaal assumed Abner attempted to make himself a possible contender for Ishbaal's throne by taking one of Saul's concubines, not even a wife, just second layer, as his own wife. If Abner had a son by her, Ishbaal may have thought, then Abner, together with the son, could be considered candidates for Ishbaal's crown, since Ishbaal didn't have any sons. That follow? I didn't think that was a very good argument myself. On the other hand, Abner may have only sought in the woman Rizpah a little human comfort. Without Abner, the northern kingdom of Israel could not begin to resist the Philistines. Ishbaal knew this, and this may have been the real source of his doubt about Abner's loyalty to him. And maybe doubt about loyalty is genetic. Whatever the cause, Ishbaal did not approve of this match, and as king, Ishbaal was ineffective at war and therefore unpopular. If Abner appeared to be more kingly, people might get rid of Ishbaal and replace him with Abner. It was then that Ishbaal recalled a religious law that did not allow for the widow to marry anybody except the husband's closest relative without permission. Okay, so the husband's closest relative has to give permission for such a marriage to take place. We came across this law in the story of Ruth when Boaz got permission to marry Ruth from her closest relative. Ishbaal accused Abner of breaking the law. This made Abner angry, and he said, "After all I've done to set you up as king and keep you safe from David, how dare you accuse me of a crime? Keep this up, and I will give you to David." He says, "I may have been loyal to the house of Saul and have not betrayed you to the hands of David, and yet you want me to feel guilty over a woman?" Just human beings, I guess. Ishbaal feared Abner and backed down, never officially charging him of that crime. However, Abner sent a message to David anyway, saying, "Make a covenant with me, and I will give Israel to you." Abner was committing treason, but he also knew only David could save the country from the devastation of the Philistines. David sent a message back saying, "I will make a covenant with you, but first you must bring Saul's daughter Michal when you come to negotiate." So he's asking for his first wife back. And then David sent another message to Ishbaal, asking him to arrange for Michal to join him as the wife she once was to him. In her youth, she did love him. Ishbaal complied. He took Michal from the prince Paltiel, whom Saul had arranged for her to marry after David's departure. This marriage had been Saul's way of punishing her for helping David escape. Saul's first attempt, for having escaped that first attempt to arrest David. Her second husband accompanied her all the way to Ishbaal's palace, weeping over losing her. And Abner took custody and told that man to go home. Whom do you think Michal loved at the time? David, Paltiel, the second husband who seemed to love her, or no one? No one asked for her input. I wonder why David was inspired to bring her to his side. Love? The assumption that she would be better off with him than with Paltiel? Was he returning the favor since she once saved his life? Was this simply an exchange of property? Was this the best ploy he could use to bring Abner to him for talks without alerting Ishbaal? One of my professors said that we should never ask the Bible questions it was never intended to answer. Oh, well, I can't remember his name, but I don't seem to be able to resist those questions. I think it was because he was overwhelmed by the women in class. He'd never had to deal with them before, and we had such a different agenda. Prior to his arrival at David's court, Abner communicated with the elders of all the tribes of Israel. He told them that he believed that God had promised that David would deliver Israel from all her enemies, but especially the Philistines, if David were king. Abner now was ready to negotiate a covenant between those tribes and David. Unknown to Ishbaal, his entire kingdom agreed that Ishbaal should leave the throne and David should become king. Abner then traveled with 20 men to bring Michal back to David. David granted Abner safe passage and held a feast for Abner and his men to honor Abner. And just after Abner left David's house, Joab arrived from a raid with all his men. And Joab was upset to hear that Abner had just been treated as a guest of honor and had left with a promise of safe conduct to the border. Joab told David, no matter what Abner said, Abner came to spy on the weaknesses of David's defenses. Of course, Joab still blamed Abner for his brother Ashahel's death and wanted revenge. Maybe, however, he was worried that Abner stood in Joab's way of becoming a general. David was not convinced by Joab that Abner was spying. So, without David's knowledge, Joab sent a message to Abner in David's name. Joab asked Abner to turn toward Hebron and meet David at the cistern of Sirah. Joab met Abner and took him aside to a room in the city gate. City gates are very important places. I don't know if you remember, but they're buildings with usually about 6 rooms off to the side, and that's where business took place. And then you could get through the gate from one door to the other, but you could also have access to these 6 rooms. And in war, you could pack those rooms with soldiers, so anybody going through wouldn't get through. But It's interesting to me that anybody would put this in a stained glass window. But Joab stabbed Abner to death. When David heard, he called out loud to God and in front of the people in the court, saying, I and my kingdom are not responsible for Abner's death. Let Joab bear the guilt, and if someone must suffer, let it be Joab and his family, if God's going to bring down a curse. He actually invited God to bring illness to that family, including leprosy, or it seems to be something like that. And then David said to all of his court, including Joab, tear your clothes, put on sackcloth. Once again, we're losing outfits, and mourn Abner. King David.
A man with all these clothes that the women make. You don't hear women tearing their clothes.
I'm sure if you really like the outfit you're wearing, you would go back, put that in the trunk, and put something on you didn't like. I'll be back. David followed Abner's bier to the grave and buried him. Then he ordered a fast, and the people wept with their king. In this way, all of the people of Israel and Judah knew that David had no part in Abner's death. David honored Abner, and this pleased the people of both Judah and Israel. There are others cynical who would say that David may have been pleased with this outcome and that mourning was simply a charade and good politics. And we call it plausible deniability. Most scholars believe that that is not the case. David's ambition to be king of Israel, as well as Judah, received a major setback with Abner's death. His rule was tarnished with potential betrayal. Whatever the case, this story is clearly claiming David's innocence, and that's what it's there for. Joab, by the way, had no legal right to avenge his brother's death. Asahel died as a consequence of war. It was not murder. And therefore, Joab had acquired something called blood guilt, something a king could take, something for which a king could take his life whenever he pleased. Joab, however, was apparently too important to David to just kill. Ultimately, Joab became David's general and sometimes henchman. And that's as far as I was going to go today. Well, our politics are not unique to our age. I think about this story, and there wasn't anything called political science to study if you were a king in medieval times. And so you studied things like Cicero, which would show how things went in Rome, and you had the Bible, and kings and royalty would learn from David how to be a king. So, and what, he seemed to protect, the right of kings by not killing Saul, all of those things that you'd also learn about what you can do as a king. And until Machiavelli came out with The Prince, there wasn't anything that actually codified it. And so the other thing that I think of is most of the people who became kings during that entire period were under 25, and we know their brains aren't fully developed. So David was about 30 when he becomes king of both Israel and Judah. So But that's the next step. How do you get Ishbaal out of the way so he can be king in Israel? And it's not that the people don't want him to be king, but there's just a little problem. Anyway, how many of you know or knew these stories before? Yeah, this is not something you can teach in Sunday school. It's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's a shame because, I mean, like I said before, in other times, everyone knew everything and used it. Not that I hope any of you use this. I just think we ought to know. I just think we ought to know these things. I don't know. What's wrong with that? Okay.